Hi everyone, I am Levi Cosijn, and today I am speaking with my friend and colleague Rok Koritnik. Hi Rok.
Hi.
Yesterday I saw the news passing of a tragic train crash that happened in Greece on February 28th, just before midnight. To be precise, it happened at 23:21 near the village of Evangelismos, which is near the city of Larissa in Greece. 57 people died, 85 were wounded. It was a horrible event. I immediately cast the chart for that moment, for that time, analyzed the event, and then contacted Rok to further discuss the chart. And we decided to make a video about it because the astrology was so powerfully reflecting a very bad event.
Right.
So we prepared some visuals, and we're going to take you through some of the Hellenistic and Hindu astrology or Vedic astrological techniques to evaluate this chart, this moment, this tragic occurrence. So I'm going to first let you share your screen, Rok.
So this is the chart of the moment of the train crash. I made it in 3 different formats, so astrologers with different backgrounds will follow this easier. We see that the event took place on the day ruled by Mars. It was Tuesday, and in the hour of Venus. We see that a domicile of Mars is rising, Scorpio, and Mars is in the 8th house of death.
Right.
The ruler of the hour, Venus, is in the 6th house of accidents. She's ruled by Mars because she is in Aries. And again, Mars is in the 8th house of death. So this is an interesting connection that I thought about because we have the ruler of the 6th house of accidents in the house of death, which could mean that we're dealing with an accident that is potentially fatal.
Right.
Yeah, want to add something?
No, I was thinking we can say that what we will see throughout this analysis is that we have a constant interplay between the Dushtana houses referred to in Vedic astrology, which is
Right.
the bad places, which are 6th, 8th, and 12th. And their lords somehow are all very strongly connected with the events and also the sensitive points that we will later analyze.
Yeah.
So here we see already 2 of those Dushtana places, the 6th and the 8th, housing these key factors like Mars being the ascendant lord and the hour, and also the day lord, and also Venus as the hour lord. Both.
Yeah, and it's quite interesting that this happened when Venus and Jupiter were conjunct. And someone say, well, and of course they are aspecting Mars by sextile. But it's important to know that they are in aversion to the ascendant. They are in the 6th house of accidents, which is a house that's in aversion to the ascendant. They don't see the ascendant. And we really don't want the benefics to not see the ascendant. And as I said earlier, they are under the rulership of Mars, who in turn is under the rulership of Mercury, because Mercury rules the 8th house. And we have Mercury conjunct Saturn.
So I think that yes, please go on.
Go ahead.
No, I was just to make it clear, right? We have the 2 benefics in aversion to the ascendant being ruled by Mars, who's in the 8th house.
Right.
And then you're making the point that the dispositor of that, Mercury, is the 8th lord and is with Saturn.
And why would this matter? Why with Saturn? Because first of all, we're dealing with the night chart because the event took place in the night. And according to the doctrine of sect, which is a very fundamental principle in Hellenistic astrology, and also later in, basically all the classical Western astrology, Saturn becomes destructive by night, and Mars becomes more destructive by day, because Saturn belongs to the day sect and Mars to the night sect. So in this case, even though we have Mars in the 8th house, it's Saturn that's even more destructive. Although he is in his own sign, but at a very critical degree. And what's also interesting is that Saturn rules the 3rd house of transportation, and it's together with Mercury, the 8th lord, but the natural significator of transportation and vehicles. So the conjunction of the two can just beautifully indicate long, heavy vehicles, so, and trains are such vehicles, long, heavy, and if we stick a little bit to the symbolism of Capricorn, they are just fixed on their track. So it's quite in line with the symbolism of Capricorn, Saturn. And then
I would add to that, Rok, is that
go ahead.
So Saturn is very important because it is the final dispositor with respect to the ascendant.
Right.
And of course, it's also, we can't really see it here, but it's, in ecliptic degrees, it's not too close to the sun, but it's actually combust. When we, look at combustion on local space, then we see that Saturn is actually combust. But it's the final dispositor, right?
Right.
And as we will see, it will have, that whole sign there has a lot more bad connotations.
Yeah. As you said, the final dispositor, which is important, and he is on the critical degree, the 29 degree. And furthermore, what's interesting about this Saturn is this, that he's casting his ray to the degrees in front of the moon.
Exactly.
So he's casting the exact trine aspects to the 29 degree of Gemini. And therefore, the moon is, we could say, it's hem between the two malefics, because she is separating from Mars and applying to trine with Saturn.
So you would say, in the Hellenistic terminology, you would say it's besieged.
Yeah, we could say it's besieged, or some would say hemmed in between.
Yeah.
But the point is that she is moving from one malefic to the other. And basically, if we return a little bit back to the principle of sect, she is separating from a malefic that's not as destructive as the one that she's applying to.
Right.
So she's kind of coming from bad to worse. So this already is a very strong indication that something's gonna go really bad.
Yeah. Yeah. Right. I think that's already clear. Here, that's already laying the foundation for something bad to happen. Now, we also have to point out that in this chart, the South Node and the North Node, Ketu and Rahu, are on the 1st, 7th axis.
Yeah.
So it symbolizes a fated event. And it was a collision. I mean, right. So
yeah, if you look at Ketu rising, we know that Ketu is a beheaded being, it's a being without a head. So this is actually quite literally what happened to the two trains, colliding frontally, basically being beheaded.
Exactly. Yeah. And Taurus, Scorpio is also connected to that, right? And Taurus is also representing the face, Scorpio. It's connected to serpents. But, Ketu and Scorpio really has this dealing with crisis situations. Often we'll see that in a natal horoscope.
And especially now, because we have Mars in the 8th house, it's the place of crisis, is the place of death, of, the difficult stuff.
Right.
So,
yeah. Please go on.
Yeah, I would also return a little bit to the moon.
Yes.
Moon is always important in every horoscope, but here even more because she's the ruler of fortune. We have this blue circle with a cross in it, which marks the lot of fortune. This is like a mathematical point that's used a lot in Hellenistic astrology. And it can be used as an alternative ascendant also. So we can count the houses from fortune, like we do from the ascendant.
Maybe you should say a little bit about the calculation of the lots, I mean, just briefly to people that are not really
right
yet. Okay.
Yeah, so it's a mathematical point, and the lots are calculated by taking a distance from one point to the other and then projecting this distance from the third point. So we can go from one planet to the other planet and taking that distance from the ascendant, or not necessarily always ascendant, sometimes from another point. So in the case of the lot of fortune, we take the distance from the sun to the moon by day, and from the moon to the sun by night, and then project that distance from the ascendant. So our lot of fortune in this horoscope is here at 23 degrees of Cancer. It's ruled by the moon. And the problem is that the moon is in the 12th house from fortune.
Yeah,
so again, we have a Dushtana situation, and we really don't want the ruler of fortune to be in aversion to fortune, to not see the fortune. And another thing is that before mentioned Saturn and Mercury, they are in the 8th house from fortune.
Yes. And of course, the moon, the Lord of Fortune, is with Mars and is nicely trined by Saturn, the final dispositor, and
Mercury.
Cause of and Mercury,
right.
The 8th Lord.
Yeah.
I mean, that's very direct.
That's very direct. I agree. So this is like the first layer. The first layer of the information is given by the just the basic, fundamental positions. Then the second layer can be, reading from fortune.
But I just want to add, before we go on with this, I just want to point out that the 9th, in this case, I mean, here we have the lot of fortune is in the 9th house, but the 9th in Vedic astrology is referred to as a place or a house of fortune, because of course it's trine to the ascendant. So the 1st, 5th, and 9th are the Dharma houses, right? They're always supportive to the ascendant, to the path. And we will see that all the trine lords are connected to the dushtanas. So here we have the 9th housing the lot of fortune, or the Punya Shaham, going to the 8th with Mars, again aspected by the 8th Lord, and then also Saturn, the final dispositor of the ascendant. We have the ascendant Lord going through to the 8th house, another Dushtana place, right? A trine in a Dushtana. And then we have the 5th Lord, Jupiter, is in the 6th house. And again, being ruled by Mars, who's in the 8th. So it's just a repetitive pattern of the Dushtana places, Dushtana lords being very directly connected to the harm.
Yeah. Very intensely so. Yeah, so what I wanted to add is that we can go further and look at other lots other than the lot of fortune to see if we can get more confluence, additional testimonies for what we're already seeing. So I decided to calculate first the lot of accidents, which can be calculated by taking the distance from Mars to the sixth equal house cusp. So the equal house cusps are basically the degree of the ascendant in every sign. So the equal sixth house cusp is at 10 degrees because the ascendant is at 10 degrees. So we take the distance from Mars to 10 degrees of Aries, and because we're measuring in clockwise direction, we will also measure clockwise from the degree of the ascendant, and we arrive at the first degree of Virgo.
Right.
So again, Mercury, the ruler of the 8th house, also rules the accident.
And it's with Saturn.
And is with Saturn and is aspecting the moon.
Yeah.
So that's already, the significators of vehicles, transport is involved with a lot of accident. It's also interesting that it's in the 6th house from the lot.
Mm-hmm.
And again, with Saturn, the third ruler. And then I also calculated the lot of death, which I calculated by taking the distance from Saturn to the 8th equal house cusp. So from Saturn to 10 degrees of Gemini.
Yeah.
And because we're measuring counterclockwise, we will also add these degrees from the ascendant in counterclockwise direction. And we arrive here very near the IC point, very close to Mercury and Saturn. So Saturn becomes the ruler of this lot of death. So again, Saturn is already a natural significator of death. He rules the lot of death. He is with the Lord of the 8th house of death and with the Lord of accidents. So we have a really strong confluence here of malefic factors.
Yeah.
And then another lot that I calculated is a very famous traditional lot for all. Basically, it was mostly used for illnesses, but it's also generally, it can be understood that it's a lot just showing where things might go really wrong, because it's calculating by taking the distance from the insect malefic to the out of sect malefic. So again, this idea of going from bad to worse. So for this chart, because it's the night chart, we're going from Mars to Saturn. So we take this distance and we add it to the ascendant, and we arrive very near the lot of fortune. And what's interesting is that the moon now becomes the ruler of both fortune and misfortune.
Yeah.
And calamity. So now we have this powerful connection, between the moon, signifying also calamity, possible calamity, and the aspect of these two, we could say
personifications of
personifications of death, right? Right. So this is this would be from my perspective how I view this chart, and just maybe I would add another layer through the 12th parts. This chart has the 12th part positions around it. In India, they call them Dwadasamshas. So basically, we divide a sign into 12 parts, 2.5 degrees each. And each of the signs, they begin with the Dwadasamsha of its own. So, for example, Taurus begins with Taurus, and then
follows the natural
Dwadasamshas follow the natural zodiacal order.
Yeah.
And in this way, we can, this is one of the ways we can use the Dwadasamshas, that the planets get, so to say, displaced in the horoscope by these invisible positions.
Mm-hmm.
And it's interesting that Mars and Saturn are conjunct by Dwadasamsha, and they come to the 3rd house of transportation.
So I think it's good to point out before you elaborate on this, is that the Dwadasamsa is a perfect fractal, is a perfect, we can really use it safely as a chart, reading as a separate chart, and because as it is the zodiac of the sign. So because some of the calculations of these Vargas are not suited to read as charts at all, which is something that we have to discuss in another video.
Right.
Basically, let's keep it brief, is that there's Vargas that are constructed in such a way that it makes sense to use their positions, their lords, and bring it back to the Rashi chart. But then there's other Vargas, like Parivriti Vargas, the harmonic charts that that make more sense. It's debatable, but it makes more sense to read them as separate charts. But the Dwara Samsa we can read as a separate chart. So we can look at the ascendant and what it's doing, and as you're pointing out,
yeah, we can read it as a separate chart, but also we can superimpose it onto the main chart. It's many different ways that it can be used.
Right, it's very interchangeable. So in that sense, it's very helpful to look for, or if we see more confluence with respect to what we're looking at from that superimposing, bringing it back to the Rashi and so forth, we can make the case stronger. So, but you were saying about Mars and Saturn going to the third there.
Yeah. So it's we can say it's an additional testimony to this. Mars and Saturn being heavily involved, as are here, by trine aspect. And I would
Mars
say,
being the ascendant lord, right?
Yeah. So by Dwada Samsha, we could say the ascendant lord is conjunct Saturn.
Yeah.
Right. So, and also one thing I wanted to point out is that Mars from the 8th house is aspecting the lot of death.
Yeah.
Almost to a degree, within 2 degrees. So that's another powerful indication. And I would say that from my perspective, this would pretty much be it.
A case like this, it has to go, the deeper you go, the more and more it has to point out, So the more we look for confluence in this case, the more we find it, So I think that's interesting. But yes, I think it's already super solid. But we can, I would just add perhaps, so we talked about the trine lords being connected to the dushtanas, but also and we can talk a little bit about that, about the 4th house. In the Vedic astrology, the 4th is the house of happiness, right? Here in this case, it is ruled by Saturn, but it is housing the 8th lord there. And it's also Rashi aspected by Venus, which is also a Dushtana lord, it is the 12th lord. So, I mean, that's an extra. That's also something that is not helping.
Yeah, but it's important, because you have, as we said before, the two personifications of death in the house of happiness. I don't think we want that, especially not when the whole flow of the chart involves so much the malefic houses.
Yes, and also the 4th also has that connotation of, I mean, it also connects to, going under.
Right. I mean, this is like a very, very old idea, which might not be as present today in how we practice astrology, but it's thought usually that it was the Egyptians who invented this kind of a prototype of houses, or at least, they paid attention to the diurnal rotation of the planets. So rising, culminating, at the meridian, and then setting and anti-culminating below. So in that sense, the 4th is also a subterranean place. And the icy point is the exact degree of it. So it was also thought that this is where things end.
Yeah. Right. So maybe I should share my screen and look at some more lots from the Varsha fall angle.
Oh yeah, cool.
Just to, it's already, the case is already made, if we can put it like this. But there is more confluence to be found. Okay, so when we look at the Shahams, I'll pull it up here just 1 second. We'll see that.
So the Shahams are the lots, right?
Yeah.
So
there's different calculations for them. There's many lots, right? We touched on 3 or 4, but we also have a calculation. It is referred to as the Mrityu Shaham or the death Shaham, which here falls at 1337 of Aquarius. It's calculated by taking the 8th cusp minus the moon and then adding the degree of Saturn. Okay, so that brings us to Aquarius 1337. And of course, Aquarius is this, Now that point is squared by Uranus, because Uranus has to be involved somehow, very within 2 degrees, and also the ascendant, of course, 1339. The ascendant degree is at 1109 when we take Evangelismos. Okay. So, and that point is ruled by Saturn, and it's also conjunct the 8th Lord. Then we have the lot of sorrow. I'll just pull it up to see, people can see it, which is also used here, which is at 1337 of Capricorn. Santapa, this is what it's referred to.
Sorrow, okay.
So sorrow is
ruled by Saturn again.
Again, and also conjuncted the 8th Lord. Okay. So that is, now we can look at the Dwadasamsa as a separate chart, as we mentioned. So we see that at that point, the ascendant Lord is in the 6th house, a Dushtana, with the 8th Lord Venus, and Rashi aspected by, strong malefics. That's one thing. As you pointed out, it comes to the 3rd when we superimpose it. We see that Mars, the ascendant lords from the Rashi, is ruled by Saturn.
And I also forgot to add that Ketu is also in the same Dwadasamsa.
Yes, and plays a important role. It's really a fated event and symbolically reflects.
Of course.
But here, so if we go through some of the Vargas, we look at the Dwadasamsa, we see the lord of that is Saturn. And when we bring it back to the Rashi, right, we can look at lordship as well. Then we see it's with the 8th lord. It also is Rashi by Venus, who's also, ruling the 12th here, also a Dushtana. So let's look a little further. Let's go through some of the Vargas, like even the Navamsha. Let's look at the ascendant lord from the Rashi. Let's look at its lord in the Navamsha. Here we see it's in Pisces, so its ruler is Jupiter, and Jupiter is also in a Dushtana. And it's joined with the 12th Dushtana lord and aspected by Saturn and the 8th lord.
Yeah, this is the interesting technique with the lords, so looking at the lord in the Varga and then seeing the position in the main chart, in the Rashi chart.
Then we can look at the ascendant. Here, the ascendant in the Navamsha has a debilitated planet, but the Lord Venus is also in the Dushtana, of course, and also has.
Oh, yeah.
So let's do those two.
Very clear, very clear.
Then we have, so Dwadasamsa we had. Some people look at, Hindu astrologers look at the Trimsamsha, planetary lord one. This is the one that makes sense. And here we see that Mars, the ascendant lord from the Rashi, is being ruled by Mercury.
By Mercury, yeah.
Who's with Saturn and, has those.
And also the ascendant is also ruled by Mercury.
Yes. So here it's also adding up. Some people look at Kavedamsha. I'm not really using this, but I'll just show it to see if we find something here. It's Mars is also ruled by Venus, and the ascendant Lord Jupiter is also in a Dushtana. So it's all throughout that we see the Dushtana places being very strongly activated throughout the Vargas even. Yeah, there's one other thing. I mean, there's what I also saw is that there's a Bandana Yoga between the 6th and the 8th, which involves the ascendant Lord. There's an equal amount of planets in the 6th and the 8th, and it involves the trine lords, all the trine lords, which is Mars, Moon is the 9th, and Jupiter is the 5th. And also the ascendant Lord. So all the trines are in a bandana. All the thing that could be helpful are, first of all, in the 6th, 8th, in aversion to the ascendant. And they're involving all the trine lords. And of those, there's the 2 benefics. All the 3 benefics, because there's a growing moon as well.
Yeah, we have a waxing moon, Yeah, I think it's an unfortunate example, but it's a very clear one. We can learn a lot from it, what happens when we have such strong confluence of malefic houses. And when the benefics are unable to exert their benefic influence.
Yes. I think we can look at the transits here too, the outer planets, because here we see the outer planets displays as well. So, I mean, Pluto is also, it is connected to the moon. I mean, moon is always going to be important. There was at that point, Pluto was also doing something exact, right? But that's, I would just,
so you're using this transit view just to see the aspects?
Just to see the aspects.
Yeah, okay.
We can,
Yeah, sure. Pluto was involved, when we look at the degree aspects,
So we have some trines, strong trines and destructive trines involved.
Oh yeah, destructive trines. That's like what? What are you talking about? Trines are not destructive.
So, Rok, how do you see that? So, for people, because usually people associate trines with something that is beneficial. It's something. So we should discuss that a little bit. But this example clearly shows that it can also be involved in deadly, horrible, terrible events.
Yeah, I like to say that when you have, say, we have 2 malefics in a trine, those are like 2 bandits that understand each other perfectly. They're already a perfect team because, they're in trine, they're in a harmonious aspect. So we have 2 malefics that are in harmony with each other. So they can really create some serious damage. And the trines are flowing. They're not, they don't signify action, like taking action like the squares do. Because the squares tell us that, okay, we're going to take some action that's going to result in so and so. So if we have 2 malefics in a square aspect, it means we are going to provoke trouble by taking some action. But if we have them in a trine, the trouble is going to come to us effortlessly. It's just going to happen. So this is the, unfortunately, we tend to think like this, it's a trine. So here we have Saturn is trine to Moon, so it's not as bad. Well, this case just proves it that it was really bad. Because these people didn't go and take some dangerous action, some risky action. They just were riding on a train, which is, quite a safe thing to do. Nothing really dangerous usually. But it still happened.
Yeah, I think that it's a good point that you make. I would perhaps add also that if there would be any cruel influence, like eighth or Dushtana influence, connected to those to that trine,
Yeah, that's important. Yeah,
and also the
yeah.
houses here are important, like because we see that the eighth trines the fourth, right?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, between the fourth and the eighth, there's a trine.
Right.
The eighth has, it's not always a, a horrible, I mean, it's the eighth. It's something that is not visible. It's where the
Yeah, but
sun
we can also
shines.
say from the Vedic perspective, the fourth, the eighth, and the 12th are the moksha houses. So in the most malefic sense, moksha is death.
Yeah, exactly. I was also thinking that, like,
Yeah.
really, it is. Now, there's one other point that I perhaps could point out, is that, let's go back here. So when we look at the chart from the moon, because you say from the Vedic perspective, when you look at the chart from the moon,
Mm-hmm.
because this is happening, this is an event that it was one moment.
Mm-hmm.
We see that the sixth lord, so let's take the ascendant Gemini, right, which is the eighth. I mean, moon is in the eighth, and it's in the sixth. From there is ruled by Mars. So the sixth is also Dushtana, is with the moon.
She's with the sixth lord. Yeah.
And then this is where the trines all really hit home, let's say, because we have these points. I mean, Saturn is the eighth lord, trining, as you pointed out, again, that moon and that exactly the 29th degree there being making her hemmed in, besieged. And then, of course, Mercury would be the ascendant lord. And, we even from the moon, we see the Dushtana influence overwhelmingly hampering this moon.
Yeah, maybe I should just emphasize again what you already kind of started, that it's the influence of the dushtanas, of the difficult houses, that result in trines being destructive.
Oh yeah.
Because if we have a trine between two houses that are not malefic houses, then the story is a little bit different. But here we do have a very strong involvement of malefic houses. So here the trine did what it did,
And also we have a strong Saturn in the fourth house, right? So is that a good Saturn, Rok?
Is it a good Saturn?
You know what I mean?
I would say, well, this is a Saturn in his own sign, so how can it act bad?
Exactly.
But this is, again, the same thing as with trines. Because why do Mars and Saturn rule the houses, the signs they rule? Why does Mars rule Scorpio and Aries? Because he becomes a benefic there?
Exactly.
No, because he can be the most malefic. He can live his malefic potential the most in these two signs. And of course, the sign of his exaltation. And the same for Saturn. So Saturn in his home is like, yeah, this is pure Saturn. But here we're dealing with Saturn who is out of sect. So he becomes, in the day sect, in his domicile, he would at least have a potential to be constructive, depending, of course, on his aspects. But here in the night chart, not so much.
No.
And we also see, again, if we go back a little bit, he rules the Lord of Death. He's with the eighth Lord.
Yeah, we can go to let's go to your, let's
okay, yeah, let's refresh it a little bit. Yeah. So back to Saturn. So he's with the eighth Lord, Mercury. He rules the Lord of Death. And Mercury also rules the Lord of Accidents. So Saturn is now being kind of, his malefic nature is being boosted because of his association.
Oh yeah.
And his out of sect status. And again, then the conjunction with Mars by the 12th part, by Dwats, and there's no way this Saturn is gonna produce something really good, you know.
Yeah.
At least not in the context of this chart with the specific ascendant.
Yeah. And Ketu is also there, who's on the ascendant in that Dwad.
Yeah, yeah.
Because it has a strong first connotation. But yeah, I would say that Saturn as the fourth lord is such a troublemaker here. I mean, it's a strong Saturn. It's afflicted by the eighth lord. And it's the final dispositor of the ascendant. I mean, it is ruling Mercury, who's having a lot to say about that. And in its turn, it is harming that happy bhava, right?
Right.
Yeah, I think it's solid. Unfortunately, I mean, it's I hope we're not being too enthusiastic about this chart. It's a horrible event, but
yeah, it might look like that, you know, but sometimes, unfortunately, you know, we must also learn on such events, because this is where we learn what it means, you know, if we have so much malefic influence, what the result of it is.
Yeah. There was no support. Was very little support. There was just, it's like a field, like the chart is like a resonance field, a field of resonance where that specific karma, where that specific action involving all those people has come to fruition somehow. I mean, it just happened. It was a fated event. I mean, the nodes show that. And so I think that's probably not a bad way to look at it, like a chart, you know, if I mean, let's say that's a quite broad way of looking at it. It's a field of potential, right? It's a resonance, and certain things will come to fruition within that context because certain karmas need to be played out. I mean, life is constantly moving and constantly evolving and changing, and this destruction is a part of that. And here we see that destructive event strongly reflected when we follow the techniques, the principles that have been developed over so many millennia. So it's definitely an archetypal expression of something.
Yeah, we could say that.
Okay, Rok, thank you very much for being here with me.
Yeah, thank you.
I'm going to leave it at that. Until next time. Thanks for watching. Bye.
Yeah, thanks. Bye.